Hey everyone, and welcome to the Forward Thinking Podcast. It's Christy and Charlie here from CS2. And today we're talking about documentation. So this next episode of MOPS in 10, we're going to talk about how to make documentation part of your workflow. So give you some key takeaways you can use internally and give them to you in under 10 minutes. So let's just kick it off. Well, first of all, why is documentation so important? I feel like we beat this over the head, but it's a good reminder.
Well, why do you think?
Well, documentation is just a history of, the plans for what you did. I think there's so much that goes on in our operational systems, and there's a lot of turnover at companies that you need to document things because it's just that artifact that you have to show what's been put in place. And the tricky part for MOPS people, and we only really realize this when someone hasn't done it, and then we enter a new business, is how much of a disservice it is to not have that documentation. You have to go uncover it yourself. So it's like wasted time. And it means that it's very rare that someone ever goes back and changes or iterates that. So documentation should be like living, breathing things around your processes. And there's different types of documentation that are useful. But the end goal is to basically have an artifact to show why, how something was built operationally.
Yeah. And you know the pain when you experience it, when there isn't documentation, right? I think everyone's probably experienced that, where you come in and things haven't been documented and you're trying to figure things out and it's really hard. So
it's also a symptom that's like, you can't really blame the person, because in a lot of ways, sometimes lots of people are under-resourced and it's very quick for them to skip this step because it's just not part of their workflow, which is why today we're going to talk about how do you make it part of your workflow? Because even if you're the most, busy person, how can you still do documentation?
Yeah. So do you want to dive into that?
Yeah. So I think, and this helps us at CS2 as well, but I think before you start any project, I think just having a document, you can even create a template for it to, start mapping out the project. What is the project? Who are your key stakeholders? When was this project started? When was it completed? When was it then updated? Like having dates for that. And then talking through, mapping out the setup. This could be through a video. It could be just written. There's actually some value to both. But if you're, pressed for time, a quick Loom video or some type of screen capture is great so that you don't feel like you have to spend hours just documenting. Before you even build anything, you can use that document to just map out your setup. And that could be using like a whimsical or WYSIWYG, or even just, bulleted points. This is what we're going to do. This is the objective. This is how we think we're going to build it. And then start from there. And the benefit of having that document that you're using from the beginning of your plan for the project is you don't just wait till the end to document, because at that point, you're just trying to get that project done. So sometimes when you get to the end, it's very easy to skip and just move on. So at the end, what you can just do is, update it to what's been currently done, and then clean it up. And then you have a final living artifact that you've used across the whole project, instead of having to then bear that burden right at the very end.
Totally. Yeah. I think we kind of have a philosophy we're trying to instill at CS2 is that every bit of work starts with, creating a document. We have a template that we have that has all of the bullet point or like inputs that we need, like Chrissy mentioned. And then that starts off the project, kind of the why, like in the discovery phase, like what the project is trying to achieve. And then as we go through the different development stages that we have at CS2, that document builds out. And then by the end, it's actually relatively quick to just document, like finish the documentation and finalize it and hand it over to the client, as opposed to, like you said, what a lot of MOPS teams do is you just jump straight into building, doing a lot of the work, And then at the end, you go, I should document this, but then you don't have the time. So then you move on to the next thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, if you just keep a document nearby, you continue to copy, just make it part of like your workflow, even the smallest things, like start a new document for them. And also it just actually gets you to slow down a bit and really think about the project. And that's a key thing too. Like there's really steps to a project, right? Like if you think about that, like Charlie said, there's discovery, there's the build. And so if you are constantly like documenting all of that, it really puts you into this like framework of really taking the time and doing all the steps rather than skipping some of them. So it'll actually probably make your work better as well.
Yeah. And just make it easy for yourself, right? Like spend 10 minutes, get the template ready. I have it as like in my bookmarks in
Yeah.
Chrome. We also have it as like a template in Google Docs. So you can just go to templates and create it. But a lot of times I just go to the Chrome bookmark, click that, copy, create the document, move it to the right folder, start writing. And it just doesn't even feel like a burden when it's just you're doing it during, as opposed to just having to do a 5-hour documentation project at the end of everything.
Yeah. And then I guess on the topic of documentation, there's like individual documents for projects. But I think also having kind of like master hub or somewhere where you have all that documentation live is also just as important. And so that'll be different for every client. It could just be a master Google sheet that you have different a workbook and you have different sheets that you have like different areas for. You could use Confluence, you could use
Guru.
Guru or whatever like internal tool you have in your intranet, but somewhere where you can actually have all of that listed is just important because the whole point is people can actually find the documentation after, which can be a lot easier to manage that in-house and make sure that you have that somewhere in your intranet, and then make that very public. So anytime someone starts, like they're very aware of like where it lives and how they can use it. And also, I think one thing to get a habit on is maybe quarterly or yearly, just looking back and seeing if anything's needed to be updated or maybe need to be removed because those processes have been deprecated. So
Yeah. And that's a very important point. And actually, we just moved all of our internal documentation at CS2 to Guru for that, pretty much for that reason, where Guru has the functionality where you can have the person who's the owner of that piece of content or that card, they call them, and you set a review cadence where it can be like a week, a month, a quarter, a year, and Guru will remind them every year, can you check and make sure this is still valid? And it will then mark on that card that it is like requiring validation. So you can see in the cards, okay, which ones are up to date, which ones are not, or which ones need to be validated. That's a really good way to keep all your documentation fresh. And then some other benefits of Guru, I'm not trying to sell Guru here, but it's obviously very searchable. So you can people can search for content. Documentation, one of the other great things about it, it's almost like for the company you work for, you probably have your support team and you have a support site where maybe if someone goes onto the support site, starts to ask a question, it will start to show relevant pieces of content to help them answer that question without them having to create a support ticket. So if you think of documentation like that, you have a sales ops person or SDR asking a question about, whatever they're asking about. But when instead of doing that, they go into your knowledge base and search there and then maybe find it themselves. And now that's taken off your list to respond to that Slack. And one of the really cool things about Guru too, you can integrate it with Slack. So when people comment in a certain channel, it will search Guru and then come back with suggestions on content. So it really is like that case deflection thing. So if you can just get into the habit of making it part of your workflow, it just pays off. And it is a tiny bit more work than not doing it, but then it's going to save you time in the future and it's totally worth it.
Yeah. And if you're working on something that you don't think is important enough to be documented, you probably shouldn't be working on it.
There you go. True.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Hope you enjoy this episode of MOPS in 10. Get documenting. See you next time. Have a good one.